He is constantly watching over me.
Good evening. I'm going to turn this mic on so you can hear me. No. Is that working? Doesn't sound like it. I'm getting older. I can't process everything. Okay, so we covered a lot, and we're going to cover a lot more. But there's some really great news at the end. It has nothing to do with Geico, so I'll share it with you afterwards. And so we're going to cover these 5 gifts tonight. There's only 10. Covered the first 5. So encourager. In the Greek, that's parakaleo, to call beside. It's like, get over here, I want to hug. They're like the cruise directors of a ship, or the activities director for a care facility. They are the ones who want you to be comforted. That's really what it means. 7% of a congregation and of a population typically test out on this on number 1. They test out at 7% that this is their top 1. That's not true for you. You'll find that out towards the end. But the Greek word means to call beside, to call near. And a good way to think of it is, think about Barnabas. His real name was Joseph. Remember that? That's what his birth certificate said. But when he sold all that he had and gave it to the apostles for the work of the church, they nicknamed him. They said, you're Barnabas, you're son of encouragement. If encouragement had a son, it'd be you. That's how encouraging you are. He was also the one when they weren't going to accept Paul, Saul of Tarsus. The apostles didn't want to meet with him. Barnabas said, come on, why don't you just come here? They're the ones who bring people in. They're if you remember Motel 6's slogan, we'll leave the light on. Or the hillbilly said, y'all come back now. That's a welcoming statement. That's what an encourager is. By the way, that is your number 1 category of everyone. Somebody to think of also that I think it's in John 3:18. John the Baptist. And we think of him, he has like those scratchy pants and he eats locusts and wild honey. He's a rough guy. But it says, as he was preaching to people, that he was encouraging them. He wasn't saying, repent, you fourfold demons of hell. He wasn't doing that. He was saying, come on, will you not repent? Don't you know God wants you? That's encouragement. And that's really what encouragement is. They're very, very important. And by the way, you're the highest tested congregation I've ever tested out of hundreds of them in encouragement. So you're a lot of fun. Okay. So, but I'm going to spend a little time on this category for you because it's your number 1 category. Because it applies to 23% of you, I guarantee it. So everybody has strengths and weaknesses. They also have in their strengths signs of maturity and immaturity. If you are a mature encourager, your attitude can be a great strength. They're self-driven, they're optimists, they're motivators. See, I'm not an encourager. I can fake it with the best of them. I'm a pessimist. I'm more of a prophet. When an encourager comes up, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Or be anxious for nothing. I'll say, but this is something. If they see an animal attacked by a pack of lions or something, or whatever they call them, and like there's a wildebeest that is missing a leg and he's running for his life, I'm saying, put that thing down. The encourager says, well, at least he's half alive. I believe the cup is half empty. And I was going to start an organization called Pessimist Anonymous, but I didn't think it'd work out, so it never got off the ground. But anyway, you didn't get that. Okay, you need to drink more coffee. Okay. The mature encourager is the most uplifting individual that one can find. They're expressive. They're typically creative. They're communicators. They're practical. And they also have healthy relationships when they are mature. They're unifiers. They're friendly. They're the counselors. But it's on the other side, the immature side. If you don't mature in your giftedness, what will happen is you're going to come across as impulsive, unstable in emotions, and often intense. They're the cheerleaders. That's who they are. Okay, if the church was a football team, the cheerleaders are the encouragers. That's who they are. The evangelist is the marketing department. The teachers are the ones going over the play. The administrator is probably like the quarterback or the quarterback coach. I mean, everybody has a place on this team called church. Now, in their immaturity, they're impulsive. What does that mean? If you are immature, I guarantee you all know somebody like this. They're like the cheerleader, and they tend to interrupt people. Why would that be? Because they just want you to keep going. I'll help you finish your sentences. I'll do this. There was this lady I knew. She was in my church I was at for 15 years. Oh my goodness. She was like really bad at that. Every time you'd have a conversation, well, you know, I was going down, and she'd finish your sentence. And it's annoying, isn't it? So what I did was to train her, I would change the entire direction of the sentence whenever I talked with her. So when she interrupted to finish my sentence, no, it was going completely the other way. I was walking down the sidewalk the other day, and I came to, the store? No, a pirate ship. And anyway, then I changed the whole dynamic. And then after like 10 minutes, I don't understand what's going on. Why is I said, would you stop interrupting? I love your sister. But you got to grow out of that. Let people finish their sentences. It's very, very important. Also, they're unstable in their emotions. Of the 10 gifts, the highest depression rates are found in the mercy givers. And we'll cover that in a second. But for the encouragers, they're number 2, not far behind. Why would an encourager be depressed? Because if they don't charge their batteries, they're holding up everybody else. Come on, you can do that. And if they're immature, they won't go and recharge their batteries. They simply won't do it. The best thing an encourager can do is to have some other encouragers they go to and drink coffee and encourage each other and charge each other's batteries. But if you try taking on the world's problems and cheering for the team nonstop, they're full of energy typically, they'll burn out. You can burn out of things, and then you kind of pull back. And their second highest rate of depression that I've seen of anybody who tests. They also can be prone to be unrealistic. I knew somebody who was very high in this giftedness, but they became a Christian later in life. And I remember before they became a Christian, they would always venture into businesses or ideas. Like they'd sometimes cheer you into enablement instead of empowering you. Or they'd say, I'm thinking about opening up 2 oxymoronic businesses that have nothing to do with each other and put them in the same store. It make no sense. Or they come across that idea, oh yeah, you can do it. No, you can't. It's not a good idea. It's just bad. And, but some of the things that you can have to obtain joy in this gift. I'm only doing this on a couple of these because I want you to see that if you don't have your own personal ministry, forget everybody corporately. Corporate ministry comes from a bunch of people who do individual ministry, then they pull it together and make a super ministry. That's personalized. I have looked at so many churches over the years, and I've talked with them about things that failed. Like this church over here did this program, and we took that program and said, yeah, let's do it. And then it flopped. Why did it flop? Because you can only work with what you have. You can only work with what you have. In spiritual giftedness, it's opposite of what we're used to. Normally, we get a ministry and then we adapt the people to the ministry. In spiritual giftedness, you get the people and then you adapt the ministry to the people. Which one do you think is going to have the most passion? The latter. And that's why if you develop ministries that are inclusive and complement your areas of passion, people are going to be more involved. And the more involvement you have with passion, you can't stop it. That's the last thing the devil wants you to do, is to be empowered, impassioned, and busy for the cause of Christ. And so if you're an encourager, some ways, just write some encouraging notes to people. I knew a lady that, when the email thing started, everybody sending emails, she started sending emails. She would kneel down and write her prayers out in the morning for people and just stick them in the envelope and send it to them. That's clever, isn't it? And another thing is memorize encouraging verses from the Bible. Why don't you have that? Memorizing scripture allows its potency to permeate one's thinking and behavior. Why not have it just strapped to your side and ready to draw out when you need it? Somebody's feeling down? You can do all things through him who strengthens you. Oh, yeah, I guess I can. Do all things with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God. You can do it. For I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. Be able to pull those things out and encourage people at any time. Why not just have them? What's more encouraging? Well, there was a verse I heard somewhere. Let me try to find. No, get it written on your heart. It'll be there to comfort you as well. Another thing, make many hospital, nursing home, and shut-in visits. We had a lady who owned a flower shop in Camp Hill. And she would always get the freshest flowers. And she would not let them go out. If they would not last a week, she'd get rid of them. And I said, Kathy, these are like excellent flowers. She said, well, I don't want them getting to a place and then saying, well, these things only lasted like a day. So I said, well, we had 17% encouragers in our congregation in Camp Hill. You have 23%, by the way, which is even more. But I said, Kathy, is it possible, because we have 2 hospitals right over by us, we have lots of encouragers and they love to give flowers. Flowers are beautiful for encouragers. They love to cheer people up. Anything that can bring a smile to somebody, they love. I said, can you give me all these and we'll make little bouquets? And for people who are in the hospital, we'll just go up and work it out with the nurses. Is there anybody who can use some encouragement? We had an entire encouragement ministry. It was going to be thrown out. I mean, it was going to be wasted. She was getting ready to throw them out. They were good for 3 days. In the hospital, that's a lifetime. And she was able to empower our encouragers. We took something that was going to die and brought it back to life. And you know what? It wasn't odd when somebody who might have met somebody from our church showed up at the congregation, because it meant something to them. A total stranger brought something to bring encouragement to them. And that helped out quite a bit. Be the first one to represent the church family by reaching out to the sick and bereaved. Develop a close relationship with a couple others who share the same gift to help that. Volunteer at a halfway house, a home for anywhere where there's discouragement. 50 to 60% of everyone in a nursing home does not have a visitor outside of the facility in a month. Can you believe that? And the more you go to the northeast and northwest, it's worse than that. But imagine what we did at Camp Hill. We adopted an entire nursing home. 100 patients. Everybody had their own visitor. And it's still in place today. Every Christmas, we get their Christmas list. We bring them, and hopefully they're alive. Somebody who might not have had a single person who would have gone to their funeral had dozens of people go to their funeral. We would line the nursing home every 3 months with 100 volunteers from our congregation, and we would bring the hymn books and we would sing. You know, activities directors measure success by the number of people who leave their room and go out of their room. Everybody would come out and join in. We redid the patio on the Alzheimer's section. And to this day, with this beautiful arbor, with seedless grapes growing, with colorful birdhouses, because the last thing an Alzheimer's patient will have for senses is color and sound. Beautiful water running fountains, some red tomatoes they can pick with the shade. It hadn't been used for 3 years. And right above that arbor, it says, done by Camp Hill Church of Christ. And to this day, they use that porch. And was it strange then when their relatives showed up at church because somebody remembered their loved one? Wow, Doug, you might be onto something. Well, you're not done yet. Teach a class on how to be encouraging to others. Chris Fry was a cradle Catholic that I went up to visit in the hospital when his own priest did, when he had a pretty serious medical condition. I went up to see him twice. I even forgot that because I go visit everybody. And what happened was, after he converted, he was lowest in teaching, highest in encouragement. He had a -14 in teaching. You can only go -16. But he had a 16 in encouragement. He was a walking smile. And I asked him, part of your growth is you have responsibility in all these. You might not have passion. You still have to show mercy if you're not a mercy giver. You still need to teach in some form or fashion, even if you're not a teacher. So I went to Chris. I said, Chris, it's time that you teach a class. And he turned white as a sheet. I saw the blood drain from his face. And he said, oh, I can't do that, Doug. I can't do that. I said, no, let me finish. I need someone who can teach one lesson on encouragement, on how to be an encouragement. Oh, you didn't say that. To this day, in that church, if I ask them what was the most passionate lesson they ever heard, it was from a man named Chris Fry who taught on encouragement. It touched them in such a way because he knew that topic. He just had to relay it. And so those are some of the things that you can do, and you need to be thinking about that. Let's get on to mercy giving. Mercy, Elios, one who can stand in somebody else's shoes and feel what they feel. That's what it means, Elios. And 17% of a congregation will test highest in this. Mercy givers possess the ability, they want to fill. I'm so far from a mercy giver. Okay. I love them, but I'm so far from that. And in Mark 10, 46 and 47, Bartimaeus was sitting by the road when he heard that Jesus, the Nazarene, he began to cry out saying, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, stand in my shoes, see what it's like to be blind and feel what I feel and be moved with compassion and heal me. That's what he's saying. Mercy givers have that ability. They want that ability. And the mercy giver is able to understand the suffering of others to the extent that they're moved to action. And a great example, the greatest example I could think of that would be the Samaritan. You remember that Samaritan? Jesus said, they said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, a certain man was on a journey, a Samaritan. Now, when I say Samaritan, the Jews did not like Samaritans. They were the half-breed cousins. They didn't want anything to do. They would literally take a whole nother day, cross the Jordan, walk up, and avoid that. When Jesus cut right through the heart of Samaria, that wasn't the normal thing to do. And what happened was, so when you hear the word a certain Samaritan, substitute pedophile, because that's how they felt about them. They had nothing good they felt in their heart about that person. But he said a certain man was robbed. And he was beaten and left half dead. That's what the scripture says. He was left half dead. So if you're an encourager, you're probably saying, well, at least he's half alive. That's not the point, okay? A Levite walked by, representative of this mercy and everything. Didn't do it. He just walked right by. And I know, being in Africa, when you go in Ghana, isn't this true? Think about that. So they fake like they're hurt alongside the road. You stop and you get robbed, don't you? I was with, you ever hear of Augustine Tawaya? He was the Secretary of Education, or Minister of Education for Ghana. I used to work with him in Ghana, and I saw somebody sitting alongside the road in the bush, and I said, well, why don't you stop? He said, no, because they're trying to rob you. And it was very common in that day. Let's put a patsy out there, and when you stop to help them, they will rob you, and you'll be the guy have your clothes beaten off you. Well, then a priest did the same thing. And Jesus said, then that certain Samaritan who was on a journey, he was going on business. He had his pager and his cell phone. He was going to Jericho to do some business. And that was like the Jersey Turnpike in the 80s. That was where you got robbed. And this guy stopped. It said he felt compassion for him. He's a flaming mercy giver. He had to do something. Somebody has to help. He bandaged his wounds. He poured oil on them, some wine to disinfect it. He put him on his base, took him to an inn, paid for the inn, said, I'll be back in a couple of days. Anything else he needs, you give it to him, and I will pay that bill when I come back. And then Jesus said, which one showed mercy to him? I said, obviously the third guy. He says, go and do likewise. That's who your neighbor is. They show mercy. But it's in the heart of somebody who the Jews would have no love for that Jesus held up as an example of mercy. And to me, I always get kind of choked up because they feel things that you don't feel. Believe me, they pay attention to it. And they have some strengths I want to talk about. They have a positive attitude. They have a heart for others. They're attentive. You know, most of the medical missions that you test before they go out, there's a bunch of mercy givers there. You want a mercy giver to be your nurse. The one that treats you like a drill sergeant and gives you the compassion of a tooth extraction. Okay, that one you don't want. Don't you want a nurse that wants, and a doctor who stands in your shoes and says, listen, I really want to listen to you and I want to feel what you feel so I can be moved to help you in the way I need to help you. That's what you want. And so they're able to be forgiving in relationships. They're content with character. They're gentle in spirit. Nobody's more gentle. They're magnets for pitiful people. Y'all like Jeff Foxworthy? Okay, let's do a little Jeff Foxworthy. If you bring home a pet, bring home a stray that's missing a leg, a dog was eyes clawed out by a cat, tail broken in a car door, has mange, answers to the name of Lucky, and if you bring him home and say, I could fix him, you might be a mercy giver, okay? That's who you are. I have a daughter like that. She's a closeted one. I came home one day and we had this couch that the pillows come off that hurt your back. You know, they're like Gumby. You can't even sit in that thing. And they were stacked up and there was a little peek hole in that commercial where they have the dogs and it says, in the arms of the angel. And they're making you feel bad for the dogs. And I thought, oh, who's watching this? I heard coming from under the pillow. I said, who's in there? She said, Dad, it's so sad. I said, stop it. You have a cat named Jessie. Okay, you don't need any more. But they're also faithful in relationships, they're listeners to the neglected. They reach out to the poor, the ill, the aged. That's not me. I'll do that, but it's not with passion. I'll fake it with the best of them. And so they also have some immaturity, very important. They can be indecisive. If you're not mature, you can get tugged in ways and be abused. You know, so many women that I know are neglected, are immature mercy givers. I want to tell you about Lisa. She was somebody in my congregation in Iowa. She found out she was pregnant with her second child and that her husband was leaving her within 12 hours. She fell into a great depression. So as a church, we rallied behind her. And she worked in a nursing home 30 miles to the north. And in Iowa, that means you're going to miss some days of work because you have to drive through 30 miles of snow at times. It's cold up there with 3 O's in it. Cold. And so the men of the congregation, we got together. We got to do something about this. So we had a couple supervisors at the local packing plant, Hormel, that said, oh, we can get her a job right here. She'll only have a 1 mile drive. We'll get her benefits. She'll make twice as much as she's making. She went in for the interview. And then I went over to her place. She lived right across the street from me. I went over. I said, hey, how'd your job interview go? Oh, they offered me a job. That's great. And she said, I didn't take it. I'll tell you, that ripped my heart out. I thought, are you kidding? People pulled strings for you. But I didn't say that. I said, well, everybody has a choice. But then I tested her 3 weeks later. She came out 16 on Mercy Giver. You can't get any higher than that. And then it hit me. It hit me. It was probably one of the best lessons I ever learned from my own topic. I went over to see her. I said, Lisa, I think I know why you didn't take that job. She said, why? I said, because you can't show mercy to a 10-pound pork loin roast. You can only show it to people. She said, yeah. She told me, she said, Doug, if I gave up my job where I go and help people, something that means so much to me, they're hurting, they're forgotten. If I gave that up, you might as well check me into the psychiatric ward because I'll be good for nobody. And so I went back to the man. I said, we have to empower her to keep doing what she's doing. She has something of value to her. We've got to help her. And, we had some people help watch the kid. We would kind of all take up some responsibility. And within a few months, we started having some visitors from Indianola coming 30 miles down to check out the church. Why is that? Because they were mercy givers like her. And they wanted to come and see the church that understood people like them. You see, it's a lot bigger than us. God is in control. But do we let him take the wheel? That's the difference. Gift of service. Normally, 23% of a congregation, this is number one. 23% of everybody you run into out in the community, I promise you, out of 30,000 tested, it comes up the same thing. It never varies more than 0.5%. There are people that are looking to do something meaningful in their life. They want to put something into action. They want to help. They want to do something. And that's what those with the gift of service has. If for service and is serving. Whoever serves, let them do so by the strength that God supplies, Peter tells in talking about the gifts. Now, the 22%, it's like 22.8. I rounded down in this particular presentation. They're the people who they're like maintenance people for people. That's what they are. Maintenance people for people. You're 18% on this category. And we'll go into a great detail on this because you know what service is. Signs of maturity, though, that you have is they're very creative. Nobody's more creative than the servant. They usually work well with their hands, resourceful with their means, usually good at meeting needs if they're mature. They're also incredibly spiritual. They pray more than anybody does. You remember Annas? You remember Anna in the temple? She was a widow for like ever. And she served in the temple with prayers and supplications daily. Servants pray more than anybody does. They put things into action. I can never outpray a servant. I can't do that. So I know there's a lot of people in here, you say, I just don't pray enough. And maybe that's the case. But a lot of times you're comparing yourself to someone you're not wired like. I can promise you that unless if they're high in teaching, they're probably saying, I don't study the Bible enough. We all have deficiencies. Who's right? Yes. That's the answer. Yes. Who made you? God did. You didn't make you. God did. They're also have a strong work ethic. They're thorough in their efforts, involved in anonymity, and pleasant in their service. I told somebody this morning, my 4 kids, from the moment that they were able to walk, I was looking for what they might be. And then I'd plug them in. And I had a son named Andrew, still do. And but I remember a flaming servant who got 15 in service. Her name was Mildred Imhoff. She came up to me in church. She said, did you, I want to talk to you about your son. I thought, oh no, because she's also high in profit. I thought, what did he do wrong? She said, I am so proud of him. I thought, oh, okay. I said, why? Well, he was walking by the faucet, the drinking fountain, and he saw some water there, and she was just watching. He was the only one there. She was watching from the other room, and he walked by salt, and when he got a paper towel and wiped it up and threw it in there. Wasn't seeking glory, anything like that. And I knew he was very high in service. He's also an encourager. He laughs all the time. He smiles all the time. Great athlete, but he's highly administrative. I knew those things about him. So I plugged him into areas that he would excel in, just like I did all my kids. Well, when he was 9th grade, he knew what he wanted to do. He said, Dad, I want to be a dentist. You know, 95% of everybody who says what they want to do at that age don't do it. They do something totally different. But not him. He was focused. He excelled in water polo, became All-American, had 5 Ivy League schools trying to get him. He turned down like 25 colleges, went to the Air Force Academy, 2-time All-American there. They paid for him to go to UPenn Dental School. He's a dentist in the Air Force. And we were talking one day, why do you like it? I know why he likes it. Because you're working with your hands, you're working with a smile. Nobody smiles more than the encourager. And you need to be highly administrative to pull that off. Of my 4 kids, I plugged them all into their gifts. This is how it happened. They knew what they wanted. They understood. And they ended up with $1.49 million in scholarships. They paid Andrew to go to school and paid for his school. And it's very, very important that you understand who you are and who you're working with. But they also have immaturities. They often have fatigue because they have a problem. They can't say no. I knew a guy, he was burning out big time. He could never say no. I'm not a servant. I fake it with the best of them. I do that every time. But you know, if somebody comes to me and I don't want to do it, I say, no, I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. Not Jonathan. Everybody go to him, say, hey, Jonathan. One time, somebody asked him, hey, I need a driver to go out to California. I'm moving out to California. Could you come with me? Help me drive? He didn't have the time, but he did it anyway. And then, you know, he had to find his own way back because they never planned it. They took advantage of him. And that hurts. When somebody wholeheartedly pours themselves into somebody and they're not appreciated. And if you're not mature, you will find that. You're also in that immaturity, you don't only just have a problem saying no, but you also take on too much and you take on impossible tasks. Emotions, they tend to be in immaturity, tend to be over talkative, tend to be too subjective. They're very subjective. They can be micromanage others. If you're immature and you're a servant, here's what oftentimes happens. If you're a mom and you're high in servant and you're immature, you're going to struggle in this way. You're going to ask your kid to do something. I'm not looking at anybody in particular, okay? Yeah, I'm looking at you, okay? And they'll say, do this. Can you get this done? And then they try to micromanage it, and then they just jump in, I'll just do it myself. That's not empowering anybody. That's enabling. And God didn't give us these passions to enable somebody to become worse, but to empower somebody to become better. That's what he gave it to us for. Let's talk about the gift of administration. You're half of the average congregation in this. You have a deficiency. But that's okay, because God knows who you're trying to reach out to. He who leads with diligence. It comes from the word prohistemi, one who stands out in front of others and leads. That's what they are. And some good examples of that, New American Standard, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek Dictionary says to put before, to set before, to rule. They're the people who like to organize plans. They're your Poindexters. They love examining plans. They're your best chess players, by the way. I'm a checkers guy. I'm not this. I'll fake it. Trust me, I'm not this. I do have 5 administrators I have a lot of respect to, and I never make a major decision in my life till I talk to each of the 5. And then I get their consensus, because they always look at something that I overlooked. And that's how God designed us. As iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. No man is an island to himself. In this congregation, do they sing, when I get to heaven? Do you sing it that way, or do you say when we all get to heaven? That's right. And that's how God designed us. That's why it's called the resurrection. We're all in the same boat. It's called the fellowship, USS Fellowship. And we're together in that boat. So the immature, the signs of maturity of these individuals, they're effective planners. Their pace is deliberate. They plan to participate. They literally want to step up, and they want to organize these things. There was a congregation I was at in the Midwest. I tested the eldership, and the eldership didn't have a single person who was administrative. They were all low in administration. They couldn't plan their way out of a wet paper bag holding a running chainsaw. I mean, it just wasn't in their passion. But the only 4 people in the congregation, that tested high in administration, 1 man, 3 women. And traditionally in the Church of Christ, the women, they're not necessarily empowered the way they need to be. There's a difference between a worship service and being involved in the work. And what happened was, they said, well, what do we do? They had a food bank. Now, they were very high in giving, but very low in mercy giving. And their problem was, I didn't know they had a food bank at the time. But they did, but they had gotten rid of it. Because when I brought it up to them, I said, you're very high in giving. A possibility might be if you have a well-organized food bank. But you're very low on mercy givers. And if you don't have people who need the food you're connecting to, you're just going to end up dusting and say, actually, we just got rid of our food bank we had for 4 years. Well, why was that? Well, we spent more time dusting the cans off and getting rid of them because we couldn't get rid of the stuff. Everybody gave. I said, well, you still have a lot of givers. Why don't you get together with these 4 people? You're still the elders, and just say, hey, we have some ideas. Think about these and get back to us. And the best idea that they completely overlooked was brought up by those 4 people. They met, and they ran the stats, and they looked at everything, the logistics. They said, well, this is what we see. And they said, wow, this is great. Just like Jethro, not Bodine, but Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. Remember that? He was administrative. He went to Moses and he says, you're going to burn out. You're trying to take on everything. Delegate, delegate, delegate. And what I told my son, Nate, when he asked for my daughter's hand in marriage, I told him not long after they were married, I was giving him some advice. I quoted the scripture to him because he loves the Bible. And I said, well, I just want to offer you some advice. He said, well, I'm a man. I got to make my own decision. I said, well, he said, where in the Bible does it say I have to? You don't have to listen to anything. But Moses listened to his father-in-law. Yeah, okay, I'll think about it. That's what he said. Well, delegation is very, very important. They were managed to do a workaround and end up with a very successful program because they adjusted. because they tapped into resources that were not being tapped in. And so there's also signs of immaturity that can be abrasive, perfectionist, have a problem with pride. And the problem with pride is that they think in a way that everything goes in sequential order. They plan everything out, and anything that kind of steps in, if you're immature and something knocks you off the path, and now everything else in the sequential order has to be reordered, that frustrates them. That's messed up. We had an elder that got up and he gave this presentation for a building expansion that we were having, and he put a lot of work into it. But then other people, it was a presentation like this, and other people started asking questions, and it really bothered him. And I went to him, I said, brother, it shouldn't have bothered you. You're a flaming administrator, but you need to work on that, because you can't have everything figured out. I know people who are highly administrative in the church who lost their shirts in the stock market because they think they figured it out. I done figured it out. That's great while the bubble's building. But when the bubble pops, everybody goes down. If you can figure out the entire market, and it always keeps repeating. I referred to him as Fast Eddie until he lost everything in 2000. You know, he would say, oh, you need to do this and that. No, I'm just going to kind of invest as I go along. I don't want to ride a bubble on dirt.com or something, whatever you're trying to buy. And so let's talk about the last one, giver. What time do I have to be over? 6 o'clock? Is that scriptural time? 5 minutes. Okay. All right, we'll go with this. Gift of giving. I have to tell you, you're very high in giving. Very high in giving. I'm going to show you just one little stat in just a few minutes, but this is one of your greatest strengths. Givers, he who gives with liberality. Only 2% of a congregation typically makes up this category. Because you gave. Givers don't ask to give. I'm talking about people who have the attitude, how much do I need to live on? That's a totally different thing. A totally different thing. Only 2% of the people will test number one in this category. You have 8%, I believe it is. That's really high. But because mature givers, they're generous, they're charitable, they're reliable, they give with anonymity. If you have that gift, you're not advertising. It's just something you have to do. You're a redistributor of blessing. You have a proper perspective if you're mature. You know, when I was in India on one of my trips, I would go there like a month at a time. And there was a brother I was riding with, Nehemiah Gudam, and he says, well, we're going to stop up here in the banana groves. There's a preacher there. He's prepared a meal for you and the team. And we got there, and it was I'm talking an area, they lived in a facility that was as big as this area right here, not counting the front porch. In that place lived the preacher, his young daughter, his wife, and his mother-in-law. But the porch had the best spread of Indian food I've ever seen. Chapatis, curry this, curry that. It was like, whoa, and there's flowers. And I mean, it was like, whoa, this is neat. We were sitting there eating. He was happy to have us there. And Nehemiah told me, he whispered in my ear, I told him, I said, man, this guy, man, rolled out the carpet for us. And Nehemiah said, when he heard you were coming and that he wanted to invite you and the team to meet the brothers in India, or meet the brothers in America, he wanted you as their guest. He spent a month's worth of wages for this meal for you. Every morning for a month, they eat something called a chapati, which is like a pancake, and curd, which is like yogurt. He didn't get any of the good stuff. Every morning for a month, he would get up, and that was what they had. A little cake and some yogurt. A chapati and some curd. But that man would get up every morning and thank God. He said, God, thank you so much that I could have a little cake and some yogurt. And thank you that my wife could have a little cake and some yogurt today. Lord, I want to thank you that my mother-in-law could have some cake and yogurt. I want to thank you that my little girl could have some cake and yogurt. And we live in a country where we push back stacks of half-eaten pancakes. And this man sacrificed a month's worth of wage just to have a meal with a brother. Take what you make in a month, set it aside just for one meal for a brother. Think he understands giving? It's a sacrifice. And I knew he wouldn't take anything. I wanted to give him money. I'd always take funds over for the people over there, particularly preacher families. And I slipped Nehemiah 3 months' wages. I said, after I'm gone, you make sure you give this to him because he won't take it. You know what I found out? Was after I left, and Nehemiah went back to him and he gave him the money. He said, Doug left you this money for your family and you, for your work. He went through his community to his church members and he distributed it. That's what I'm talking about, the passion of giving. And very few people have that. And you have one of the higher percentages of a tested congregation. They're generous, they're charitable, they're reliable, they're immature, they can have a bad attitude, they lack awareness, they can be gullible. I know some people who just love to give, but if you're immature, you need to do research and see where you're giving it. I knew a guy who supported a man in Africa for like 5 years. He was supposed to be going to school to become a doctor. He was a member of a church, but he never followed up. The guy never went to school. He was living the life of the prodigal son in the big city. And when he found that out, how do you think he was devastated to find out he had enabled somebody and drove him further from the kingdom? It's part of the maturity. And so let me close with this. This is your breakdown of a sample of 99 people. The average scores that you see right here, this is what, if I were to go out and just knock doors and take 1,000 people, that's what they're going to come out with. Always is. Instead of 10% for administrator, you're 5%. Encouragers, usually only 7%. That's not right there. You're 23%. Okay? Evangelists, no, forget that. That was the old data. Let me turn that back on. Okay. I corrected 73 tests. I went through manually and corrected everything because the algorithm got knocked off when they upgraded the security. And so he had to go in and change it after the 25th. Everything was accurate. But those 73 beforehand, I went through and ran it through. And your elders, a detailed report is not being prepared. It's already prepared. Your elders have it. We went over it. And it was very detailed, wasn't it? And I have to tell you that in that 8-page report, I can honestly say I've tested hundreds of congregations around the world. You got some great working material. You really do. You're the highest in encourager that I've ever had. And you're also very high in giving. And you have average shepherd, but those are your 3 strengths. And where you're weak is in evangelism, is one of them. Also, what else were they weak in? Administrative. Okay. And what was the third one? Servant. It's servant. Yeah, not prophet. Servant. And the reason why it's servant is because you're 18% when the average is 23, but you have more people who say, I'm definitely not a servant, than you do saying that you're a servant. The largest category, and you have a bigger category saying you're not. And what happens is there's a plan. I gave them a good compass they can look at. But I have to tell you, you have a great, great potential because of the high encouragers. If you just refine a few things, I'm telling you, people will come in. If you can establish a relationship with a visitor with 6 meaningful relationships within 6 weeks, you tenfold the chance they're going to convert. And you have the ability. You're like a giant walking hug. 23%. You know, when you ask people, before I became a Christian, I wanted to weigh up and find out what people thought. I was like a nerd. I just randomly knocked doors and I asked people, what are the 2 most important things that you look for in a church? Consistently. Number 1, are they preaching the truth? And number 2, how do the people make you feel when you see them? All right, you got that down. You got the football, run with it. You should be passing Forrest Gump soon if you try. And so I want to thank you for taking the time. I hope this is clarified. This book I was just hanging on to. Did you get a book? Okay, you got a book now. It's used. There you go. Thank you for having me.